All right, thank you all. I'm going to talk about consumer tech from the perspective of people building consumer tech. So it's not our experience, all of us as consumers and people in the world, but rather what's coming for the way we build consumer tech. Back in 1971, a very famous decision scientist, Herbert Simon, formulated this concept that a fundamental task of human existence, of cognition, is the allocation of attention. Right? We decide what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. That's what we're doing every microsecond, every minute, every larger unit of time. And he pointed out that with a wealth of information, as information grows, what becomes scarce is attention. And this is the formulation that led to the pretty familiar concept now of an attention economy, which is what we live in today. In every space you can imagine, there's more ways to spend our time and spend our attention than ever before. Shows on Netflix, restaurants in Grab here in Singapore while you're here, items that you can buy, 260,000 SKUs added in 1 year in Shan, a leading commerce platform. More apps in the App Store than ever before. Since 2017, there's been 2,500 apps launched across the Play Store and App Store just for meditation. Which means for a consumer business, your fundamental problem is how to preserve the attention of your customers. And we can all feel it, right? Like, you've probably heard some interesting talks, hopefully, in the last couple of days, and maybe you've been inspired to learn about something. But when you go home, when you go back to your hotel, Netflix is waiting on the TV, you're thinking about ordering something else, or you could just say, I need to decompress and spend time in TikTok, and you're not going to go on and learn about the topic that you wanted to. This is the fundamental problem that we're all facing, and it's not unique to any. It's true for everyone. Benedict Evans gave a great talk yesterday, and I had to take a slide from him that just pointed out, right? Like, the engagement rate for even ChatGPT plummets, because even something as cool as ChatGPT has trouble competing with TikTok and Netflix and Spotify and food delivery and everything else that you could do today. So now, the problem for a consumer business faced with this problem of holding and renewing consumer attention traditionally has been a form of software and a workflow on that software. So what we have, the last 10 years has been the age of big data, and you've had all of these points of data systems where you're pulling in information from your website and from your mobile app and your point of sale systems. And then you pass that to a system where you'll generate some rule, some campaign, your marketing team will decide, well, let's use sort of the date that we last saw a customer to define some high-value user segment, and then formulate maybe some expected lifetime value for them in order to send a mobile push notification. And the problem is that this doesn't scale. It breaks down at every point because it's a choke point when an engineering team has to come involved to pass the data into the system, and then the data science and analytics team has to kind of figure out how to calculate expected lifetime value, and then the CRM team has to figure out how to send a push notification. It breaks down, and so what we end up with is really generic engagement, really generic products that don't hold our attention, and we leave them, we do something more interesting. And the only real way to solve for the problem so far has been hiring more people, maybe internally or maybe using an agency, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't scale. Now, that is changing very rapidly. Right? And so if we think about just like consumer technology over the last 3 decades, only as recently as the 90s, the personal computer came onto the scene, and all of a sudden we could have applications. And then in the early 2000s, we moved those applications online, and we engaged in a browser instead of on the actual hardware. And then the phone came along, and it changed the modality because it's sitting in our pockets. So now we can make decisions and consume information as we're walking along the street, in the back of the cab on the way to the airport. But the problem is that the underlying architecture stayed the same. We basically took a store where you take a big building and you put all the things anybody could ever want into that store, and we just pushed it behind a screen. So now you can open an app and find out everything anyone could ever want. And the problem is, any given consumer doesn't care about 99% of the things in that store or in that app, but you have to navigate it. So then you face the paradox of choice, and you face cognitive scarcity, and you get bored and you move away and you decide to do something else. What agentic AI is doing is saying that way of building software is not inevitable. It's not the way to do it. And in fact, it can change. But what has to change is the entire underlying architecture. We call this software 2.0 versus software 1.0. Software 1.0 is rules. A human creates rules, and then the software implements and automates the rules. But agentic software says the agent determines a rule. Now, the key thing is this is cool, but what's required for this to actually work? So what we're going to talk through in a couple of minutes is just what is the 4 fundamental capabilities that we need to enable in the infrastructure to enable this to work. Surrogate models, embeddings, edges, and weights. These are the things that the agent has to be able to manage and kind of that instantiates its form of intelligence. Okay, what are surrogates? So a classic problem for any consumer business is to come up with some kind of a customer journey. You do this, and then you check out, and then you're good. You apply for a loan, you do KYC, you qualify, you pay, and you repay. You take the loan, you repay. Now, a digital product kind of exploded that in the sense that it's not a strict one-dimensional sort of static linear process. You can go in and you can shop for something, you can look at items, you can come back off, you can go back in. You can do it any kind of a way. So what's behind the scenes for that digital product is what's called a click stream. It's all the possible events that application can track when a user does it. It's usually for a given mobile app will be hundreds of possible events. And the way that any given user has to click around in that app is exponential. It's combinatoric, so it's huge. It's a huge space. Now, for an agent to know, as humans, we kind of know, like if you're dating someone, if you're getting to know them, you know that you're not going to propose to them on the first date. Instead, what you're trying to find is, are you a match somehow? So you're not asking them maybe even questions about, do you want to have children? Too much, right? Like that's a sure sign of a bad date. Quick, get out of there, close, get the check, right? But you know that there's early signals. And that's what an agent has to be able to do. They have to have a way of moving away from an objective function of a transaction and saying, well, what about the first exploration in the app would lead us to think that you're strongly considering something, and if we gave you a little bit, if that agent gave you a little bit more information, it would lead to a little bit more exploration. It's the shopping that happens prior to the buying. So the way they do that, a way an agent does that, is maintain a surrogate model where it maintains the connection between every single possible point in that journey and the kind of objective points. Now, what that leads to is a much cleaner process of engagement over time. So what we see here is data on an x-axis over a period of weeks. Every one of these little shaded gray lines is basically a week. And the gray bar here is just tracking the user's activity in the app. Now, traditionally, you set up a rule. You said, well, if you come into my app 3 days later, I'm going to send you a notification, 5 days later. It's all static, rule-bound. Now what happens is an agent observes your activity, creates a message, sends it to you, tells you about a certain aspect, does it again, you ignore it, does it again, tries something different, you come back, it learns something from why you came back, and then it does it again, and it does it again. The key thing here is that there's no choke points, because every single one of these decisions about engaging, every prompt that agent has given to the consumer, to this particular user in the app, was determined by the agent. It was not determined by a CRM team or a data science team. This is very different. The point is, every single person gets their own experience because the agent is learning and responding to their particular experience. Now, all of this is probabilistic, so they have to be able to maintain these surrogate models so that they can kind of estimate, well, here's the probability, here's the baseline probability, here, how am I moving forward? And the key thing is that as a business, what that means is you send a lot more noise into the system. So you're not constantly sending messages. So this is a unicorn health app that uses Aampe, my company in the US, where they drove up actual conversions for this marketplace and significantly dropped the volume of their messages. So less noise in the world so that you can actually capture real attention. Now, the second capability are what are called embeddings. This is how language models work as well, but instead of an embedding for text and language, what we want to create an embedding for is a given user. And what the underlying data is a sequence of actions, those events in the application and the responses to message and everything you might be tracking about that person. From an agent perspective, from a human perspective, what an agent is doing is they need these embeddings to almost sort of to mimic a form of collaboration and teamwork. Now, two things are important here. One is you don't want to create an embedding. Does not mean like how many days have you been active in the app, or did you spend over $100 or less than $100? These are really simplified, very generic, kind of simple characteristics. What's happening when you use a mobile app is that every millisecond, it's basically tracking a particular action. And so what you have to do is take that sequential data and convert it into very high-dimensional space that represents somebody. And that's the embedding. But then what that allows is, once you have that representation of a person, an agent then can engage with other agents to run experiments. Experiments are not optional. It doesn't matter how much data you have in the world or how smart your AI is. Nobody knows exactly what you want for lunch in 2 days. But what we can do is run experiments. And if you have a personal assistant who's helping you, they still have to run. They still are asking you, do you like this? Do you like this? Right? And so an agent can't run every possible experience with their person because it's too expensive from the person's attention perspective. So the agent has to, behind the scenes, be able to say, hey, what are the other agents that are dealing with a similar person, a person in similar space in the world, similar space in life, similar space in their journey, so they can run comparisons and run experiments. The third thing is the edges. Edges represent the product. So a personal assistant, a chatbot that knows you as a person, might know you as a person. But what a consumer business's agent needs to know about is your business, your inventory. So if you're a fashion business, the agent needs to know everything possible about your inventory and all the different fashions and all the different pieces of items and clothes. Because if they're trying to learn you, they don't just need to just know you. They need to know what in that inventory, what as a business is best positioned for you as a person. Now, this is actually where you're going to see some of the most explosive changes, because even though in the last 10 years we've called it the age of big data, it's actually been a really the age of very shallow data. Our data hasn't really been big. In fact, in the next few years, it's going to explode more than ever before. Let's take the example of Spotify, because Spotify is a very progressive tech company, and they can illustrate one of these changes. So Spotify helps you find music that you want to listen to, and they have over 6,000 genres of music, and most of them are made up. But what does that mean? It means traditionally when we think about genres, we might think, I like rock and I like hip-hop. But any of us that actually listens to music know that these genres are shallow. They're not how we actually think about music. It's a lot more specific than that. I don't just like hip-hop, I like dark trap. It's a particular kind of hip-hop. It's characterized by different frequencies and things like that. When we recommend music to somebody, we recommend based on, as people, very deep and rich descriptions. But traditionally, consumer apps have only dealt with shallow data. So over here, I think this is Deezer. This is a music app that's about the same size, much older than Spotify. And you can see their categories are rock and soul and funk and rap hip-hop. Very standard traditional stuff. Spotify is giving you lyricist and masterpiece and scream. What do those even mean? Doesn't matter. The person who knows it. They're tracking it. They're comparing notes on TikTok. They're engaging. These are the language that represent them. Now, what happens is, if as Deezer, if all I show is soul and funk and rap and hip-hop, that's all I've ever shown to you, then I can't learn anything about your response. But if I've shown you all these very specific messages, these specific tags and labels, I can learn. And that's what every big digital product is basically a series of signals which tell you something about the world that allow you to allocate your attention, or rather tags that allow you to allocate your attention, and signals which are decision points you can make, actions you can take to change. And Netflix is another example. Instead of just action and drama, we have mind-bending, offbeat, quirky. Netflix has a team that manages over 3,000 tags, and they're pushing it into the interface, and it makes a better experience, and it makes a much easier way to actually learn and engage. And I won't show you that, but then what the agents are doing is taking all those tags, that rich data about their inventory, developing scores of them, and they're managing those scores in order to run those experiments, in order to allocate information for you. And that happens in fashion. And so that ultimately, when you open an app, you shouldn't be seeing the exact same description of the same pair of pants. You should be actually seeing rich description that fits your value proposition, the things that you care about. There's no reason in 2024 for us all to see the same app from the same company. I'm short on time, so I'm not going to talk about recommender systems, but there's all kinds of ways that agentic infrastructure changes the way we run recommender systems to make them far better. Recommender systems have changed the world in the last 10 years, but not nearly enough, and they will continue to improve. It's also going to completely change the way we use chatbots, because right now chatbots start from a clean slate every single time, which is annoying, which is why nobody uses them. But what you can actually do is have your application, your agents, feed system prompts to chatbots, which is going to be a very cool transformation of how chatbots work. System prompts. And so key takeaways here is that this is the reality we live in, and if your business isn't solving for this problem, it's not really solving for the problems that actually are going to determine its success. And that the current tech we use, the current software 1.0, is not just not solving the problem, it's actually blocking you from solving the problem. But the newer methods, agentic infrastructure is here, it's available, and it will change things very rapidly. Generally, I'm a pretty cynical, skeptical person about change. In this instance, I think the change is incredible, and which means it's a really fun time to build. Very exciting time to build, and exciting time, hopefully, to be a consumer soon. That's it. Thank you very much.